of the faculty at the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, IGIDR, since 1988. He has taught courses on statistics, econometrics, development economics, food policy analysis, human development, and Indian economy at the IGIDR and various other centers. He served as editor of Indian Journal of Agricultural Economics, as well as member of several expert panels of Indian Council for Social Science Research, ICSSR, and the Union and State Government of India. He was a consultant for various national and international organizations for the Ministry of Industry and Planning Commission, Government of India, a visiting fellow at the Economic Growth Center, Yale University, a senior economic advisor at the International Poverty Center, UNDP, etc. He has also served as a consultant for ADB, OECD, UNDP, and the World Bank, and also provided technical assistance to developing country governments, including Bangladesh, Botswana, India, Nepal, Somalia, and Vietnam. With this introduction, I welcome Professor Suryanarayana to kindly deliver this lecture. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Rajesh, for your nice words, introduction. Okay. Good morning, friends. You can hear me, no?
Yes, we can.
You can hear me. Hear me, right? Okay. Good morning, everybody. So what I'm going to present to you is something based on my own experience. As you know, Rajesh has already told you about my experience working for different governments, different countries, etc. And essentially in terms of economic policy advice or preparations, background papers for different policy papers, etc. So in this connection, quite often I realize that, a clear understanding of fundamentals is very important. Quite often we think that, particularly when it comes to elementary statistical methods, what we call descriptive statistics, most often we don't know when to use them, how to interpret them. So I thought I should share this kind of experience with you today so that you won't commit such mistakes in your research career. Okay, let me just use some PPT so that it becomes clear. My presentation becomes very clear. Okay.
F5, sir.
Yeah?
F5 for slideshow.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now it's clear, no?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Well, let me just do. Again, I mean, this is my request to all of you. So some of the concepts may be too elementary. So just tell me that to skip those slides. Okay. What I will do is, this is my favorite topic. Whenever as Rajesh has already told you, I have been teaching statistics, econometrics, not only at IGIDR, several institutions. But I always begin my first lecture with the introduction to levels of measurement. It is my firm conviction that it is very important to know levels of measurement. What do they imply? What are the implications for it? Maybe even for a simple drawing of the histograms or bar diagrams, or maybe some graphical representation of data. It could be even for applied regression analysis. But quite often we don't bother about these issues and mechanically proceed with our analysis. That's the reason I'm going to quickly, I won't spend a lot of time on this. Generally, I spend almost, sometimes I just take 2 hours just on these levels of measurement, but I will just give some 2 minutes introduction to you. As you know, we classify data with reference to levels of measurement. As all of you know, the 4 important classification is as between nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. Why it is important for me to make this distinction? I know the levels of measurement essentially implies it has any implications for the information content of the data. Let me just tell you what it means. So whenever you talk about measurement, properties of measurement or scales of measurement, generally we can measure these four properties, define these properties. One is identity. So that means what I say mean each value on the measurement scale has a unique meaning. It helps in identifying. Then the second is magnitude. In fact, the moment you assess certain values to these in your measurement, it helps you in ordering these different magnitudes, whether something is less or more. Then equal intervals. You can also define the difference between these different measurements. Finally, whether zero is defined or not. With reference to these four properties, we generally define or classify scale of measurement. Okay, let me just begin. What are they? First, we have this nominal level of measurement. What does it mean? Here, in this case, when the moment you assess certain values, it only helps you in identification. As I already told you, it's identity. It may be just names. For example, we have names for different states in India or the different students attending this discussion. So what are the limitations? Okay, it only helps in identification, that's all. And you cannot order them. Only so that's the limitation of this particular scale of this type of measurement when you have nominal scale level of measurement. For instance, I may collect some information while conducting my survey. So I just get answers as no or undecided. Quite often, we collect this kind of responses. So they also belong to what we call nominal level of measurement. Fine. Let me go to the next level, ordinal level of measurement. In this case, this kind of level, when we have this kind of levels of measurement, it permits of ordering. So we can see whether something is more or A is more greater than B or B is greater than C, and like order permits ordering, but we cannot say by how much. The differences we cannot really say about it. Okay, so the advantage of this is slightly a higher, better level of measurement, both identity and magnitude. For example, these days we grade the students assignments or in the examination we grade them A, B, C, D, etc. Essentially, A is greater than B. So we really don't know the difference between the two. So that is a disadvantage of this level of measurement. In other words, you can see now we have got a slightly superior level of scale of measurement, which permits ranking, but it does not permit differencing. You cannot go beyond that. Okay, now let me go to the next level, the interval level of measurement. So this has the additional property that the difference between any two data values is meaningful. We can compute the difference. Unlike the ordinal scale, when you have an interval scale, we can talk about the difference between the two values. Okay, so in that sense, it is a superior scale of measurement. It satisfies identity, magnitude, and also equal intervals. For instance, I can talk about different years, the difference between what in 1976 and 86, 10 years, and like that, I can compare the different points of time and compare the differences. So this is what we call about interval level of measurement. Finally, we have the ratio level of measurement. This is the most superior level. Even here, in this case, even difference zero is defined. It satisfies all properties of measurement. As I talked about, I initially specified these four types of properties: identity, magnitude, equal intervals, and an absolute zero. Fine. So what happens is, what are their properties? When to use them? Nominal, essential for categories. Ordinal, when we can order them, rank them. Interval, we can talk about differences. Ratio, not only talk about differences, but we have a starting point here. So it's very important to keep this important feature of scales of measurement, particularly when we do applied statistical analysis or applied econometric analysis. Quite often we deal with measurements and we should know how much the information, what is the information content of these measurements and how effectively we can use them. This is one important point. Most often we are not taught to be careful about. That's the reason I always make it a point to talk about the scales of measurement, what are their uses, how do you categorize them, and how are you going to use them. This will become clear as we proceed further in my discussion. Okay. Now, this, if you look at hierarchy level of measurement, I already told you, nominal is at the lowest scale. Then we got an ordinal, interval, and ratio. Fine. Now, having talked about the scales of measurement, I will just talk about bar diagram and histogram because it's in a sense related to scale of measurement. Let us say, what is the difference between a bar diagram and histogram? All of you must be knowing this. So what is the difference? Imagine I have state-wise population estimates. I'm taking, let's say, census data, that may be 2011. I have estimates of population for different states in India. How do you represent it? I may generally be represented in terms of bar diagram. What is the why? Here, essentially, we have information about states which are classified with reference to nominal scale of measurement. Yes, classified with reference to states: Karnataka, Kerala, Maharashtra, Gujarat, like that. So on the one hand, we have the scale of measurement is on the nominal scale, and on the other hand, we have information on the maybe even in the ratio scale. If you have population estimates for different population states, we use a bar diagram. I can simply plot different bars which are proportional to the frequencies or the estimates of population for different states. There is no problem at all. I am not bound by any restriction here. Okay, let us say I'm going to next talk about histogram. When do you do a concept of histogram? I'm just giving some information about the National Sample Survey data on consumer expenditure distribution. Okay, in this case for urban all India for the year 93-94. So how would you go about drawing it? Would you draw a bar diagram? No, you'll draw a histogram for this. That's what we are taught. Fine. Why do you know the histogram? Particularly when we do applied statistical analysis or applied econometric analysis, it is very important for us to see the nature of distribution. Generally, we want to see whether it is normally symmetrically distributed or symmetrically distributed, or generally our favorite concern is to know whether it follows normal distribution. Let us say I plot this data, I just give it to Excel and ask it to plot it. Or if you give it to students, what they do is they just take a graph and they start plotting it. Let me just see, I'm plotting these observations. What I'm going to plot? See, for example, I've got here on the one hand, look at see on the one column, on the leftmost column, monthly per capita expenditure class. These are class intervals. Then I have got frequencies. Then I have got monthly per capita expenditure. What I want to understand is to examine the distribution of profile of this data set. Whether consumption distribution, whether it follows normal distribution, or whether it is skewed. So what I do is I just plot it on a graph. Let us say I'm plotting it. So what I'm going to do is in the central column, I've got per 1,000 number of persons. That is essentially these are what are called relative frequencies. And okay, I have got on the left first column, I've got monthly per capita expenditure class. These are class intervals. Let me see, I just plot them on a histogram. So this is the picture I get. Now let me know. So what will be your inference based on looking at this graph? Any suggestion? Anyone of you can answer my question? Hello?
Repeat
Any
your
one of you?
question.
Sorry?
Repeat your question.
My question is, for example, we have this data set. This is the National Sample Survey data on consumer expenditure distribution. Okay, consumer expenditure distribution for urban all India. I want to examine the distributional profile. I want to know whether this data set follows normal distribution or whether it is skewed. Hence, what I do is I draw it on a histogram. So this is my histogram. Okay. So looking at this histogram, what will be your inference? Would you say that it follows normal distribution?
It's a skewed.
It is skewed, is it?
It is skewed, sir.
Yes.
Not exactly normal. Normal distribution seems to be like bell-shaped curve.
Okay, fine. So now, like I say, I'm just discussing applied statistical analysis. Quite often you have to it is not simply statistical analysis. You have to apply your understanding of economic profiles. You have to apply your common sense also. Okay, you're absolutely right. This is not bell-shaped. This is not normal. Doesn't follow normal distribution. Rather, if you just forget, the two bars at the either end, you may see that it almost looks like a uniform distribution. But if you recall your economics, what you know that generally we would expect consumption distribution or income distribution to be skewed distribution, isn't it? Positively skewed distributions. You don't expect them to be normally distributed. You always find that they're highly unequally distributed, positively skewed distributions. But look at this graph. It is nowhere near a positively skewed distribution. Am I right? Fine. So why do you think that then I have got this kind of profile? That means there is some mistake in the way I have drawn this graph. What is the mistake? What I've done is I have just taken this data set, I defined these class intervals, and I just simply plotted those frequencies. That's why I got this picture. Fine. Look at the width of, look at the column width. They're all the same. Actually, look at this data set. Class intervals are unequal. The first class interval is 0 to 160. The second width of the class interval is 160 rupees. Look at the second class interval, 160 to 190, just 30 rupees. Third one, 190 to 230, 40 rupees is the class intervals width. Then 230 to 265. In other words, you can see that the class intervals are not of equal width. But what I have done, I have plotted this graph or the Excel. I just gave it to an Excel sheet and asked it to plot it. So you can see that if you look at all bars are of equal width, which is wrong. I have committed a mistake here in drawing the graph. Not only that, I didn't follow any principle. So while plotting these frequencies, I simply plotted those frequencies, relative frequencies. I committed two blunders while plotting this histogram. So what should I do? I have not followed any principle. In fact, drawing a histogram, it needs certain principles to be followed. Bar diagram, I don't have any problem. Now, what I do is I correct my mistakes and draw a proper histogram. Look at this histogram now. It clearly shows that it is a consumption distribution in India is positively skewed distribution. Look at the width of each column. I would take the care of the unequal widths. Look at what is that? What I have plotted on the vertical axis? I have not plotted the frequencies. Quite often, students, whenever we give an assignment like this, they mechanically plot frequencies, and they get this picture. They said it follows a uniform distribution. Sometimes they would say that. But what I should plot whenever we have unequal class intervals or not frequencies or relative frequencies, or I should plot frequency densities. Frequency per width of the class interval. That's what I have plotted here. So it can clearly show that it clearly brings out the skewness in the distribution. Okay, any question here? Is it clear? Hello?
Yes, sir. Is it clear?
It is clear, no? I can
It's
proceed
clear,
further?
sir.
Okay.
Yeah, sir, sure.
Okay. Now
Thank
let me ask you a question. If it is clear, let me just ask you a question. Look at this upper class interval, last class interval. It is greater than or equal to 1055. This is what we call an open-ended class interval. Then how would you draw this class column? What is it? How will it close this? How would you draw this bar diagram, column bar? What feature I should make use of? This is a very simple question. Essentially it follows from the properties of the histogram. The sum total of the area under the histogram should be equal to 1 if these frequencies are in relative frequencies. Okay, so what I do is I have to plot these histograms such a way that the area under the histogram is equal to 1 or 100, depending upon how these frequencies are measured. So that is that we make use of this condition to plot the last column. This is precisely what we do, when we have open-ended class intervals. These are some important elementary things which you have to keep in mind before we proceed with any statistical analysis. Now let me ask you a question. Why do what I have taken is only simple and histogram for NSS consumption distribution. This is the first step which we always have to follow whenever you start your data analysis. It may be NSS consumption distribution. It may be fitting a regression equation. It may be even considering the specification of a regression equation. We should examine the properties of the distribution, whether it follows normal distribution, whether it follows skewed distribution, whether it is positively skewed, negatively skewed. Unless you should have a very good understanding of the properties of the distribution, you should not go ahead with your statistical analysis. Whether I can use mean, whether I can use median, or whether I can use mode in my statistical analysis depends upon the property of the distribution. So the first step in any statistical analysis is to either to draw. I'm just giving a simple example of drawing histograms and see the properties. Okay, this is the first step. Fine. Now let us see. Why I'm going to do. Why I have given these issues quite often in any public policy, as you know, that Dr. Rajesh has already told you about my experience with working with the different governments. Okay, quite often governments, or if you look at any policy document by either government of India or even if you go through our 5-year plans, you find simple mistakes because of which they commit major blunders in policy analysis. That's what I'm going to discuss with you today. Okay, then we'll just what is public policy? I'm going to draw your attention to issues related to public policy, how statistics is very important in any public policy analysis. So public policy essentially refers to the decisions of the government to address certain issues of common concern. It may be reduction of poverty, it may be reduction in food insecurity, or it may be just educating a population which is illiterate in a particular region. Fine. So whenever you formulate your policy, there are different stages of public policy making. First step is to define the problem. We should define the problem. We should know the magnitude of the problem, the profile. You should know how serious it is. It's almost like going to a doctor. You go to a doctor, first, unless he examines you or unless he looks at certain important profiles, maybe he may look at your blood temperature, heartbeat, or he maybe even ask for a certain blood tests. he looks at these profiles and defines the problem. What exactly is the patient's problem? Then he constructs alternative policy simulations. So what's different policy medicine prescriptions that he should consider. That's how a doctor goes. Similarly, in public policy making also, we've got generally 6 stages. First stage is to specify the problem. Then construct alternative policy alternatives. Then you have to choose the best solution. Then we have to design the policy. Then we should start a policy implementation and monitoring. Then we have to evaluate. So these are the different stages in the public policy making. So right now, I'm going to discuss with you only the first stage and how we are going to use statistical tools. What sort of blunders generally we commit? Fine. But if in any public policy making, the most important requirement is information base. You should have good understanding of the information base. You should have good understanding of the concepts. You should have good understanding of the criteria for identification of policy options, targets, etc. But quite often what we do is, whether it is in India or any country, quite often people don't take these issues seriously. They think that all of us know these are simple issues, we don't have to worry about. Now I'm going to discuss some of these issues. Okay, fine. But let us say the problem, it applies to India also. We always think that we have a well-trained public bureaucracy which knows everything. We have great experts in policy making in India. We always think like that. But I want to show you how inadequate our public policy making exercise is. An important problem of public policy making in India is that information base is inadequate. Most important, it is enough. Quite often I know it is impossible to generate perfect information. But we should have good understanding of the limitations of the information base. Quite often this kind of we fail to understand the issues because we also don't know the concepts, measures, methods, how to use them, etc. This is what I'm going to discuss in terms of this statistical analysis in public policy making. Fine. Let me really go to our Indian public policy making. I'll give you some examples now. One thing you might have seen that right from the first 5-year plan, we have been talking about poverty in India. And different 5-year plans have different versions of strategies for poverty reduction. For instance, we have the 6th 5-year plan, growth with redistribution. Okay, so this is what has happened in Indian public policy making. And if you look at the first 5-year plan, we have been talking about growth with redistribution. And if you look at, quite often we have debates also. If you look at whether these TV programs or whether newspapers or even economic and politically weekly issues, quite often we see people talking about how many of us are poor, whether poverty in India has declined, who is poor, who is not poor, etc. We have been having debates. People fit pen functions, etc. But let me just ask you a question. Do we know how many of us are poor? Do we have sound information base to make estimates of poverty? I'm talking about a very simple concept. Okay. In other words, if I can make estimates of poverty, if I have only a representative database. Yes. Do we have a representative database? Most often, in fact, if you look at the estimates of poverty in India, or
Sir?
estimates, hello, yes.
Yeah, sir, sorry, good morning. Sorry for interrupting you in the middle. Yesterday only I could see a multidimensional poverty index 2019, which was from UNDP.
Yes.
They have taken 3 dimensions: health, standard of living, and one more. That goes beyond income, I guess. So there were 3 dimensions.
Okay.
And several indicators, and
exactly.
they gave certain weights to each of them, and then they
Fine.
created an index. Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
So I wanted to ask you whether, I mean, how do economists and researchers decide upon which dimension would justify the more closer definition of poverty? So that was my question.
Okay. Okay, so I'm not discussing that part now. Okay, at the end of the class, I'll come to your
Sure, sir.
part.
Sure.
Okay, because I'm just taking only one dimension. Okay, I'm glad that you asked this question. It's a very important question. So you are asking whether it should be a multi-dimensional measure of poverty or single dimension. Now I'm talking about a single dimension measure of poverty, that is income-based measure of poverty or consumption-based poverty. What I'm trying to show you now is, okay, the multiple dimension is a very complicated issue. I'll come to that point at the end of the class. What I'm telling, look at this single dimensional measure of poverty, consumption-based estimates of poverty. This is what we have been, Indian policymakers have been using right from the day we got independence. We have been computing poverty. Poverty was, some people say that it was 50%, it went to 70%, it decreased, increased. People have been computing regressions, everything. People have been talking about it. Again, you must be knowing that the government of India periodically estimates, appoints some expert group. In 1962, it appointed an expert group on poverty. Then again, sometime in 1976, they appointed another Lakdawala committee report on poverty. Then again, he appointed another committee, Tendulkar committee. And recently, we had a Rangarajan committee report. So periodically, we have expert groups on poverty. The Planning Commission, if you go to the Planning Commission websites, you can see the expert group reports on poverty. Okay, let us say what I'm referring to is estimates of how do we generate estimates of income poverty, income deprivation, or consumption poverty. In India, we don't have estimates of income distribution. We have only estimates of consumption distribution. So we make estimates of consumption poverty. Okay. So first, if you want to define consumption poverty or what we call incidence of poverty, as defined in Indian public policy literature, Planning Commission documents, we need some information base. What is that information base? Generally, we use estimates of NSS consumption distribution. We have an institution called National Sample Survey Organization in the Department of Statistics of the Government of India. Earlier, it used to conduct national sample surveys every year. Now, once in 5 years, it conducts a national sample survey of household consumption, tabulates, and provides estimates of consumption distribution, which I already shown you. Just some 2 minutes, 10 minutes back, I showed you a consumption distribution, estimates of consumption distribution in urban India. So people generally, we take such data sets and make estimates of poverty. If we define a poverty line, maybe I may define a poverty line of 100 rupees or 200 rupees, and I can see, estimate the number of people with consumption less than 100 rupees, then I call it poverty ratio or incidence of poverty, or we also call it head count ratio. This is how estimates of poverty are carried out in India. Okay, let me tell you, but when I teach statistics or econometrics to my students, I don't tell them to start like that. First step for you is to look at the authenticity of the database. That is, can I use this sample data set to make estimates of poverty? Does it constitute a representative data set? Of course, people ask these questions. People always, if you look at go through the hundreds of papers which have appeared on poverty in India, they always say that NSS data sets are representative. NSS make use of a representative sample of households. So these households, NSS sample households, they constitute a very representative set. That's what they always say. Quite often it is very important to look at, of course, sample households are representative of the underlying population. I don't have any question. But what is that we are dealing with? We have to clearly understand it. It's just like the way I told you about it, drawing a bar diagram or drawing a histogram. We have to think before you use any tool, before you use any data set. So now let me talk the National Sample Survey. I know the set of households are representative. But what is that we are using? We are using estimates of consumption distribution. Are these estimates of consumption distributive or representative? These estimates of consumption distribution would be representative only under two conditions. One thing, the household should be representatives, and the distribution of consumption across households should also be representative. Unless these two conditions are simultaneously fulfilled, the estimates of consumption distribution would not be representative. You're not asking me a question. Have you understood my comment? If you say you have understood, I'll skip it and go further. Have you understood my? I'm making a
Yes,
point
sir.
that the estimates of consumption distribution published by the National Sample Survey data and used by the Planning Commission or the hundreds of experts, academic experts of the government in India to make estimates of poverty, they are not representative because they don't fulfill the two conditions required for an estimate for a data set of consumption distribution to be representative. Because on the one hand, of course, the sample households are representative, but the estimates of consumption of these sample households are not representative. My question is it clear to you? If it is not, what is not clear to you? Tell me. If it is clear, I'll simply skip this slide and go further down. Hello?
Sir, I could understand it.
And tell me, Delma, okay, let me, what do you mean by second part? Why do I say that estimates of consumption distribution are not representative?
So only on the basis of consumption, we cannot arrive, I mean, we need to have more variables included in so that it gives us the close approximation or approximation of the variable under study.
Okay. I will tell you. Okay, again, here, this is why I'm telling you, we have to recall our understanding of statistical tools before we make use of any data set. While collecting information about consumption from different households, there is a serious problem of reporting error. Whenever you collect statistics, whenever you conduct a survey, it is very important for us to look at different types of errors. One thing is sampling error. If the set of sample households are not representative, then we have a sampling error. Of course, NSS samples are representative. I won't have serious sampling error. I don't have to worry about them. Next question is there is also an important error called reporting error. That when you collect information from the different households, it's quite possible that there are errors in their reporting when they report estimates of consumption. So quite often, you particularly in the Indian situation, you would come across this kind of error, what are called reporting error. What is that reporting error? What is it due to? As you know, in India, till recently means till the mid 50s or 70s, till mid 70s, a substantial part of the labor market used to be informal. Even now, it is informal in several parts of the country. What do you mean by that? People used to be paid in wages in terms of wages in kind. Particularly, if you go to a rural area, if somebody works in my farm, I would pay them not fully in cash. I would pay them in kind. I would give them prepared food items till lunchtime. They will come to my house. I will someone in my house, my mom or someone will prepare food, cook food, and that will be distributed to these people. Wages used to be paid in kind. Again, by evening, when these workers go home, we pack them and give them some chapatis, rotis, or some sambar, etc. So this used to be what is the wage payment in kind used to be a very predominant form of wage payment in India in the 50s or 60s. If you go through these rural labor inquiry reports, you can see that in the early 50s or even the early 60s, almost about 60 to 70% of the wage payments used to be in kind. People just used to be given prepared food items. They used to eat them, or they used to pack them and take it home and eat with their family members. In such a situation, if you ask these people, if these your maid servants or the workers in your farm, how much did you eat? How many kilos of rice you eat? How many kilograms of wheat, your jowar, bajra, maida, your pulses you eat? They won't be able to say. They will simply tell you, paid per kaya. I just ate my house card content. And they won't be able to measure in terms of kilos, grams, etc. But if you look at the NSS schedules, you ask precise quantities. Rice, how many kilograms or how many grams you ate, how many wheat, how many grams, how many pulses, how many grams. Everything is in terms of precise grams. You have to collect information if you look at the NSS schedules. So what the NSS experts from India, the Indian Statistical Institute, they know that, in other words, they'll be reporting error. Particularly when there will be wage payment in kind, which used to be substantial till recently. Now it has declined to just at about 2 or 3% in India as a whole. People would know. They will just say, paid bar kaya. Kitna kaya, paid bar kaya. So how many grams of rice, how many grams of wheat, they won't be able to tell you. So how do you overcome this reporting error? We wanted to know, whenever you collect information, it is very important for us to reduce what is called minimize the reporting error. In order to address this problem, what they did was, we want to collect information from those who ate. Instead, we only collect information from those who cooked food. So, because those who cooked food will be able to tell you how many grams of food they cooked without any error. So, and that's the reason we always say that NSS sample design is such as to obtain estimates of averages, not consumption distribution. In other words, we want to obtain estimates of total consumption correctly. So whenever collecting information about food consumption, the NSS investigator make a distinction between those employee households and employer households. Employee households, if they have obtained cooked food, you don't collect information and record in their consumption schedule at all. You simply go to the landlord who cooked food and paid wages in kind to the workers and how much food they cooked. As a result, what happens is, and you record their food cooked in their household as their consumption. As a result, what happens is, the consumption of the landlord, employer household is overestimated, and the consumption of the employee or the laborers who are paid in wage in kind, their consumption is underestimated. This is why I tell you that estimates of consumption distribution are not representative. In other words, if you look at the NSS estimates of consumption distribution, they do not correctly represent the estimates of consumption. The estimates of consumption of the landlords are overestimated. The estimates of consumption of the employees are underestimated. In other words, our poverty estimates are overestimates. This is precisely one important reason. I tell you, most of I always get surprised. Our experts never thought about these fundamental issues. First step in any data analysis is to look at how representative is the information base. In other words, this is the poverty of our policy making on poverty. We never knew how many of us are poor, whether poverty has decreased, poverty increased, etc. This is because our estimates of consumption distribution are not representative at all. Okay. In other words, my suggestion to you all is that whenever you do data analysis, you have to examine these properties of this data. What is the scale of measurement? What is the distributional profile? Then are they representative? If they're not representative, I cannot use them to make estimates of poverty or inequality also, because definitely my estimates of poverty and inequality are all wrong. They're overestimates. But this is the major problem of policy making in India, another dimension of poverty. You understand? So students, whenever you do research, it's very important for us to examine these fundamentals first. Quite often, if you go to any great institution, they think that these are all the elementary tasks. We don't have to worry. What we should know is computer packages, fit in some data set, complicated regression. This is what we always, this is how we are taught today. The more sophisticated the regression technique, you think your research paper also gets sophisticated and highbrow. That's not the way. You should look at the first step in any statistical or econometric analysis. You should ask fundamental questions: scale of measurement, nature of distribution, whether the data set is representative. In other words, my summary suggestion inference is that NSS estimates of consumption distribution are not representative at all. You cannot use the NSS estimates of consumption distribution to make estimates of poverty. In fact, the entire debates that we have been having since we got independence on estimates of poverty, whether poverty in India has declined, whether the poverty has increased, what happened, we see hundreds of papers which appear in EPW, this is all nonsense. This is the first time I'm telling you. So even the expert groups, we have got repeatedly expert groups have defined the new poverty line, everything. It's all nonsense. No, we can't do because they use the national sample survey data to make estimates of poverty at all. This is the fundamental problem of policy making in India. Okay. Any question? If you have any question, I will stop it. I'll explain, answer, and go. I'll go to the next step. Okay, since there is no response from you, I'm going to go to the next step. Averages, let us say. Yeah, I'm going to give you another example of mistakes which most of the experts do, and I'm straight away taking from the 11th Five-Year Plan. Okay. You must have seen the 11th Five-Year Plan document. There are 3 big volumes on the 11th Five-Year Plan. Okay. I'm taking some important bullet point from the 11th Five-Year Plan document. There is a chapter on food security. Fine. If you look at this chapter, the 11th Five-Year Plan says that there has been a trend reduction in calorie intake in India. I suppose you know that. One of you asked this question of multidimensional poverty. Okay, let me say another important dimension is that of poverty is also the inadequate calorie intake. So if you look at the 11th Five-Year Plan document, it shows that there has been a trend reduction in calorie intake. They declined by 8% in rural India and 3% in urban India between 1983 and 2004-2005. Okay. This is again another problem in poor understanding of statistics and econometrics. What is the problem here? Whenever you say trend, please recall your statistics. Trend is an important feature of a time series data set. Unless you have a time series information, you can't talk about trends. But look at our planning commission experts. They just take 2 points of time, 1983 and 2004, 2005, and compute the reduction in calorie intake, and they said there is a trend reduction. We just don't know. I cannot, but just based on this is an important, simple statistical mistake people are making. I can't just take 2 points of time, 1983 and 2004, 2005, and say there has been trend reduction. I can only say that between 83 and if I just take 2 points of time, 1983 and 2004, 2005, the calorie intake has declined by such and such percentage. It is quite possible. Why? It is quite possible that in 84 it has increased, 85 increased further, 86 it declined again. It has been fluctuating year-wise. So when I don't have any information for the intermediate year between 1983 and 2004-2005, I cannot say there has been a trend reduction. This is another thing, look at this is how the power policymakers make inference and do it. Okay, fine. Now there's another mistake. If you look at the Five-Year Plan, it says average calorie intake fall increasingly short of official poverty line. Okay, our poverty lines are defined with reference to some calorie norms. I'm talking about the old poverty lines, not the Rangarajan or Tendulkar poverty line. If you look at the old Lakdawala poverty line, it was anchored in calorie norms. In other words, a consumption basket which cannot ensure at least 2,400 kilocalories in rural India and 2,100 kilocalories in urban India. They are called poverty lines. And if your consumption expenditure below that poverty lines, you are called poverty line. You are called poor, below the poverty line, household or individual. So, what this 11th Fire Plan said is, calorie intake has been increasing for short of this poverty line calorie norm. So 2,400 and 2,100. They are referring to average calorie intake. This is another fundamental mistake. You can't make any inference about the population based on average. Do you know why? You can make generalize the inferences based on average only when the distribution is normal. Only when the distribution is normal, average estimates of mean-based averages, per capita consumption, they are representative. I can make any inference. Only when the distribution is normal or equal. But I have already shown you the histogram for consumption distribution. They are not normal. They are possibly skewed distributions. So what should I do? So I cannot make any inference like this 11th Fire Plan document, or like if you go through different successive fire plans, they just take averages and make inference. This is wrong. But even when to use an average, you should be very, very careful. You should look at the distributional profile, whether it follows normal distribution. Only if it follows normal distribution, I can make inference. Okay, now tell me, what is the mistake? What are the mistakes that these people have committed? Let me just show you. Okay, I'm giving this quotation from the 11th Fire Plan. Look at this quotation. Let us read. The calorie consumption on average, you see, this 11th Fire Plan is diagnosing the problem. I have already told you what are the different steps in public policy making. First step is to diagnose the problem, specify the problem. You look at our fire plan, it specifies the problem of food security in terms of average consumption, which is absolutely wrong. The calorie consumption on average in rural areas has fallen way below the calorie norm for the rural poverty line, 2,400 calories. It was lower than that norm 20 years ago, and it has actually fallen since then on average. Since the poverty line threshold for urban areas for calorie consumption is 2,100, and urban consumption too was lower on average than the norm 2 decades ago, and has also fallen. It's obvious that the non-poor consume more calories on average than the poor. Look at the way they diagnose the problem. If you go to a doctor, and if he does that, he will simply kill the patient. That's precisely what is happening in India. They simply kill the patient. Indian economy. Even after 7 decades of planning, our country is a poor country. We are not growing at all. This is precisely what happens. People don't know when to use average. People do not know how to interpret the properties of the average, how to generalize those conclusions, etc. Now, say, what is wrong with this? Look at this great paragraph. I have simply taken from this 11th Fire Plan. These are not my thing. I have put in quotations. Please note, I have simply taken them from the 11th Fire Plan document. The whole analysis of the problem of food insecurity in terms of averages is absolutely, which is wrong. One thing is I cannot verify, I cannot use NSS data to make any inference on poverty or food insecurity because it is not representative. Let us forget that for the time being. Let us say forget that it is not representative because all our great experts have been using NSS data to make estimates of poverty and inequality, everything. So let us go with the Great Planning Commission. What are they doing? They look at averages. They look at simply averages and make inference about the population. What is wrong with that? Let me just show you. Can I use that? I told you, I already told you, I'm just using my economics and common sense. Distributions, most of the economic distributions or variables or distributions of variables in economics are positively skewed. So I cannot make any inference based on estimates of averages because estimates of averages are robust only when the distribution is normal. Fine. Now what I'm going to do, so now you're not asking me a question. You have been very well behaved. I don't know. No, you don't ask me a question. So you're not asking me what is wrong. You should have asked me a question. So now I'm going to show you what is wrong with this kind of inference. So what I'm going to do is I'm dividing the population in 10 equifrequency groups, what are called decile groups. So if you look at the lowest blue line, it refers to the per capita cereal consumption of the poorest 10% of the population in rural India. If you look at the second line, then it refers to the, this one. It refers to the per capita cereal consumption better, for the second poorest decile group or second poorest 10% in rural India. So in other words, I have divided the rural population into 10 decile groups, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I have plotted them. And I have plotted what is happening in India since 1972, between 1972, 73, and 2004, 2005. What does it show? You can see that, contrary to what this planning commission document said, you can see that per capita consumption of the poorest 10%, it has been going up. In fact, it has gone up almost by something like, gone up something like some 8 kilos to 10.5 kilos, something like that. At least by something by 25%, in terms of with reference to this 72 base. If you look at the poorest 3 decile group, their per capita, okay, since they're all compressed, they look like that. But actually, if you look at the actual figures, you can see that the poorest 30%, the poorest 30% of the population who are the poorest in the country, their consumption has increased at least something in the range of 20 to 25%. It is the richest people who have been reducing their calorie intake, either for health reasons, for a variety of reasons. Their cereal intake, they have been declining. In the same story, urban India also, this is slightly compressed. Okay. Now you used to know, so you have not asked me a very important question. Whenever you listen to a lecture on statistics by any expert, never keep quiet like this. You should ask questions. Okay. Now you should have asked me a very important question. What is the question? Sir, how justified you are in connecting all these points? In fact, I can say have data. This is not a time series data set. I have a data observation for 1972-73, then a decade later, 1983, then again a decade later, 1993-94, 1992, and I have simply plotted them, connected all these points. I am wrong. I should not do that. But I have done that. I've done that just so that the picture comes up very clearly to you. That's the only reason. In fact, I'm wrong. I'm not at all justified in plotting this graph. I essentially connected it just to show you that the consumption of the poorest 3 decile groups in urban India as well as rural India has gone up. And if I look at the calorie intake also, it is the poorest, for example, the poorest decile group, look at the poor in the rural India, something like from 1,200 calories, it has gone up to 1,500 calories. And in the second poorest group, their consumption calorie intake also has gone up. In fact, the bottom poorest 30%, contrary to whatever these different great academic experts or the planning commission experts say, the consumption of the poorest 30% has been going up, cereal consumption as calorie intake. It is only richest people who have been reducing their calorie intake and cereal consumption in both rural and urban India. Okay, this is precisely one important limitation of average. Those of you who learned statistics in your high school or colleges, you must be knowing that you always say that it is estimates of average based on per capita norm. They are not robust measures. They are highly susceptible to outliers. Now here the outliers are it is the richest people who are the outlier. Their consumption has been declining. That's why the average also shows that there has been declining consumption. In other words, for skewed distributions, you can't use estimates of per capita average to make inferences. But our planning commission not only planning commission, 5-year plan documents, but of several experts who have been writing papers in different journals, refereed and non-refereed journals, they make inference based on averages, which is wrong. So even when when you have a skewed distribution, now let us not make use of averages to make inference. It is very important to have a disaggregate profile of the distribution and study the changes in their consumption or income profile. Fine. Do you have any questions? So now you know what sort of misleading debates we have been having in India, either about food insecurity or food poverty. So simply stated, and so in other words, let me come to summarize what I have got. I have still half an hour. One important point is that we cannot discuss anything about poverty because we do not have estimates of representative estimates of consumption distribution in India till today. Point one. So just don't know how many of us are poor. This all just an academic exercise, meaningless academic exercise, but that's what it is. Again, whenever you analyze estimates of distribution, you should be very, very carefully examine whether it follows normal distribution. Only if it follows normal distribution, you can carry out analysis in terms of averages. Otherwise, you cannot. You will make wrong inferences like the way the 11th Fire Plan document has committed. The kind of blunders 11th Fire Plan data has committed. 11th Fire Plan document has committed. Okay. Okay. Now I'm going to give again another simple statistical mistake that we do. Fine. Unequal class intervals. I have already told you how the NSS consumption distributions they provide the distribution profiles across unequal class intervals. I'm going back to some 19 to. I'm taking data for different years for that you understand whatever I'm talking about. Earlier I gave you an updated data set 93, 94. Now I'm going to give a data for even for, if you go earlier year 1972 73. I'm giving you consumption, the nutritional profile of households. Okay, this is about these are the different class intervals, and this gives you distribution of households across class intervals. So 0 to 13, 13 to 15, 15 to 18. In other words, all households or who have per capita consumption expenditure up to rupees 13, they fall in that class interval 0 to 13, 13 to 15, like that. You can see that 13, then class interval, width of the class interval increases as we go up. Fine. And we also have got a per capita calorie intake for each class interval, percentage of population, and we also have monthly per capita expenditure and percentage of total expenditure on food. So this gives a complete data set. I can use it, use this data set quite often. If you look at our different 5-year plans, they estimate what are called Engel functions. Okay, so they try to plot this relationship. We need to know, if I increase, suppose, can I increase? Quite often we debate how to solve problem of food insecurity. You might have seen that debates. People say that we should give them more income. Many experts, even the World Bank, many non-resident Indian economics, they suggested give food stamps, give them money. What we know, if you give them money, anything will happen. They can go and buy. They can, consume more food and eat and everything. So quite often people try to estimate an Engel relationship. Suppose that is the study the relationship between calorie intake and per capita expenditure. So they want to plot it. So I plot it. So this is the graph I get. So let us say, sometimes, we don't have to use only statistical considerations to analyze any statistical output. Here, the case I'm referring to is this Engel function, calorie intake across monthly per capita expenditure class. I try to plot the relationship between calorie intake and monthly expenditure. So on the horizontal axis, I have written monthly per capita consumer expenditure. On the vertical axis, I have plotted calorie intake. I have plotted it. Okay, so this is what we call Engel function or calorie Engel function. It tells me how calorie intake would increase if I have more, if I give more income to the people or more expenditure. Do you have any comment on this graph? Any one of you can comment on this graph. What is wrong with this graph? Statistically, there are many problems here. I'm telling you, sometimes we don't even have to go to statistics. Even using economics, we can evaluate this statistical output. What it shows that as income increases or consumer expenditure increases, calorie increases at an increasing rate. You can see that from here, the convexity of the curve increases at an increasing rate. That means higher the expenditure, people keep on consuming calories. Is it true? No. Just because my income is more, I don't keep on eating chapatis and chapatis and chapatis. I will die. As you know, Ambani's, Tendulkar's, and these are the richest people. Narayana Murthy, these are the one of the richest. Some of the Azim Premji, these are the richest people. They don't eat hundreds of chapatis just because So after a point, they stabilize, isn't it? So the calorie intake won't increase at an increasing rate. It will be asymptotic to the horizontal axis. So that is a mistake which in my the way I have drawn these graphs. What is the mistake? The mistake is that the class intervals are unequal. I have not really taken into account this important profile feature of this data set. So in other words, I should have taken into account this feature and adjusted the graphs accordingly. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just plotting it, taking into account this important feature of unequal class intervals. So if I am going to plot it, what does it show? This is the correct picture. You can see that calorie increase only up to a point, the calorie intake would increase up to at an increasing rate. After a while, it increases at a decreasing rate, then finally it becomes asymptotic to the horizontal axis. Beyond a point, people won't increase their nutritional intake. This is the correct specification, correct plot of the calorie intake graph profile. In other words, how you plot the graph is also important. Now, you're not asking me a question. Why do you think these are important? Now, before you specify any regression equation, it is very important for us to plot the relationship. It may be bivariate relation. Here is the bivariate relation. What I'm doing, I'm studying the relation between calorie intake and monthly expenditure. And so I want to see it. So I know that the relationship, I cannot have an exponential specification. I may do that. Quite often people would fit this kind of functions, thinking that this is correct. This is wrong. I have not plotted the graph correctly. Actually, this is the relationship. This is a true relationship between calorie intake and monthly per capita expenditure, and my specification should match this profile. My choice of specification for the regression function should be this. This is what quite often experts don't take note of. So this is, in other words, what I'm taking, what are the preliminary steps which you have to undertake before you carry out any econometric analysis? This is what it is. Okay. I have many important issues to discuss, but okay, let me go. I want to give you some more important hits. One from other, not only 5-year plan documents, but also from economic surveys of the government of India. I suppose you must have heard enough about the economic survey 2012-13. It is one of the most celebrated economic survey of the government of India. I suppose you know why. I'm a good economist. I assume I'm not going to tell you why this is the most celebrated economic survey of the government of India, but I assume that all of you know. So let me just, I'm just taking certain statements and I put them all in quotations. I've simply taken them from the economic survey of the government of India 2012 and 13. Fine, let us say. That's one important point. If you go to the chapter 10, there's an important line. The economic survey commends India's achievement in human development. How? At a growth rate in average annual HDI of India between 2011, it is among the highest. What it does is, economic survey, it computes the growth rate in human development index for India. Okay, between 2 points of time, 2000 and 2011, it is one of the highest in the world. Okay, and this interpretation. So what is the mistake here? There is nothing called average annual HDI. Human development is a stock concept. There's nothing called annual. For example, I can say, what is my annual consumption? No, so the human development, so already, I think one of you talked about multidimensional poverty. You're talking about, health dimension, education dimension, etc. Similarly, human development index corresponds to 3 important dimensions of human development: health, income, and longevity. So it is essentially a stock measure. There's nothing called annual human development index. But it is computed average growth rate and everything, and it's one of the highest, and the team said India is doing really good. It says about it, but God alone knows what it means. Why? Because we are referring to growth rates in average normalized scores of variables with different units of measurement. Human development index is defined with respect to 3 dimensions of human development. As I already told you, health, education, and income. The units of measurement for all the 3 dimensions are different. So to facilitate their computation, comparison, aggregation, and averaging, etc., you normalize them with reference to lower limits, upper limits. We do a lot of the circus there, gymnastics, and we get some scores. And human development index, essentially, they are averages of scores, normalized scores. For such scores, if you compute growth rates, what do they mean by that? They're almost like that, when children playing, constructing Empire State Building using cigarette packets. Same thing. So this kind of, this is economic survey, this most celebrated economic survey of 2012. Then again, I'm taking another statement from the same economic survey. It presents estimates of annual average decline in poverty differently. Annual average decline. Look, what I mean, before you use your word, you should know what we are using, what concept you are taking, what do they mean by that? I always tell my students, a barber has a pair of scissors. A cobbler has a pair of scissors. A tailor also has a pair of scissors. Finally, a surgeon, he also had a pair of scissors. It's only a surgeon who knows theory, who knows anatomy, and who is a perfect trained surgeon, who will be able to perform surgery and clean the patient, cure the patient, whatever may be the disability problem. If you give it a cobbler or tailor or cobbler or tailor, they will simply kill the patient. That's what quite often happens. There is a difference between average annual decline and annual average decline. Okay, so what we need economic survey, what it gives is it provides estimates of poverty for different years. 1993, 1999, 2000, 2004, etc. So in other words, what we can compute only is an average annual decline. So for different points of time, not annual average decline, because NSS estimates of consumption refer to annual average consumption. They are point estimates. So we have a per capita estimates of poverty for different years. That's what we do it in a year. In other words, here is a surgeon who doesn't know the concept he's using. He doesn't know the techniques he's using. He doesn't know the estimates he is providing, and doesn't know how to interpret. And this is the economic survey that we have. So it is very important to you, even simple concepts, not only graphs, average, etc. What the growth rates are also, it's an important problem, which most of our experts don't know. This is the famous economic survey. Now I'm giving you another story from economic survey 2012-13. I even specified page number 273. There's a big section on inequality. It talks about inequality, it talks about what happened to inequality in India, etc. Does our surgeon know what is meant by inequality? How do you measure inequality? Of course, he provides estimates of Gini ratio. What is his definition of Gini ratio? It is reported in the Government of India, their economic survey 2012-13 on page number 273. It is the deviation of the distribution of income or consumption among individuals or households within a country from a perfectly equal distribution. Let me tell you, this is a perfectly inaccurate definition of Gini ratio. This is not Gini ratio at all. In other words, our surgeon who is trying to perform surgery on the Indian economy doesn't even know what is Gini ratio. Further, it is very convenient. This is worse than the worse. What he has done is simply this definition. Our expert has simply plagiarized from the UNDP report. This, if you look at the annual human development report or the International Human Development Report, these definitions repeatedly published every year. These are our glorified experts. Not only in other words, what I'm trying to say is that we have experts, glorified experts all over the world, not only in India. They don't know what they're talking. They don't know what they're using. So this is the definition of Gini ratio, which is wrong, which is reported in the International Human Development Report every year. You go into all those human development reports, you can see these. The same definition is reported in the appendix. And our Government of India expert He simply reproduces that definition. In fact, this is wrong. He doesn't know what is Gini ratio, but he's written a huge chapter on inequality estimates, what is happening, why it is doing so well, inequality, etc. So this is the problem of policymaker in India. No, I'm not not only about policymakers, but also, even when as researchers, when you look at it, please look at these fundamentals. Quite often, we are not taught to understand the fundamentals first before we use them. It runs through, in our DNA. I don't know, in India, wherever you go, we are not understand the fundamental. We have to just learn the first elementary details, concepts, database. Are they representative? How do I plot these graphs? How can I use these averages? Can I use these ratios? What is the difference between annual average decline and average annual decline? What is Gini ratio? These are the elementary statistical concepts which are not used in India, which are abused in India. For that matter, which are abused all over the world. Experts don't know how to use even these simple concepts and techniques. This is the major problem of policy making. Okay. I have only Rajesh, what should I do? I can go on talking, but I just 10 minutes. Should I stop and ask if we'll let the participants ask some questions?
Yeah, you have 15 more minutes.
Yeah,
So
what should I do?
5 minutes you can talk more and conclude. And have
Okay. Fine. Now let us say compute an average growth rate. I have already talked about growth rate. Let me just say, how do you compute the average growth rate? Let's just say, how many of you know, if I'm in any interview panel, it may be for selection of students, or whether it may be selection of even the faculty members in different institutes. If people generally, since I teach statistics and econometrics, people expect me to ask some questions on some elementary things. I ask my favorite question is, how do you compute average growth rate? I always do, if I'm in interview board, I have simply taken this again, my favorite economic survey. I have taken this data set from the economic survey 2002-2003. And if you look at this table on S4, and appendix of the economic survey, you can see there is a table which gives you annual growth rates in per capita net national product for different years, 85, 86, and different years. Imagine. So I have got that. So generally, what I ask you, people, you can see that we have this great 1991. 91 is our great reform year. So when the per capita GDP declined, per capita and NNP declined by 1.5%. So generally, I ask to make life easy. I ask the participant to ask it to compute the average growth rate before the reform period and after the reform period. Sometimes I also ask them to compute the average growth rate of 3 subsequent years, 1991, 91, 92, 92, 93. How do you compute average growth rate? Oh, how do you do that? Quite often, the standard reply I get I get from experts is that we add them up and divide by number of observations. This is what people quite often do it. Then if I raise my eyebrow, then people think that there is something wrong. They say, sir, it's not like that. No, we should not take arithmetic mean, we should take geometric mean. The moment say the geometric mean, I tell them, how will you compute the average growth rate for these 3 years? 1991, the growth rate was 3.3, 91, 92, it was minus 1.5, 92, 93, it is 3.1%. How will you find out the geometric mean of these 3 growth rates and compute average growth rate? Then people give up. So I know some of you may be knowing. So this is but strictly speaking, whenever you have some only limited number of observations, you should take the compute just annual growth rates and take the averages. Okay. So how do you do it? It is not, you don't take the geometric mean of R. This is 4.6 R. Let me say R 1989-90 is 4.6. R 1999 is 3.3, R 91-92 is minus 1.5. So what I do is, strictly speaking, what I do is there's a rationale for that. I don't take geometric mean of R. I take of geometric mean of 1 plus R, 1 plus Ri. So and then I compute their geometric mean. Check the geometric mean and subtract 1. then I will get the correct representation of the growth rate, average growth rate. That's what we should do. But most often, when I've gone through several textbooks on statistics, people say that those textbooks have written, we should take geometric mean, but it can't work when we have a negative growth rate. It's not really true. You don't take geometric mean of growth rates themselves. You take geometric mean of 1 plus R, then compute. That's how you go about it. Now let me just give you an interesting example. I was preparing the Maharashtra Human Development Report. I've taken the government Department of Economics and Statistics of the government of Maharashtra gave me this table. What is this? It tells me the sector-wise GDP for Maharashtra at 99-2000 prices for different years, 99, 2002, 2008, 2009. They wanted to comment on the agricultural growth performance of Maharashtra during the first decade of the new millennium, that is 2000, 2001 to 2008-9. I teach econometrics. You know, the favorite obsession of all the academic experts in India, but if you just go to different issues of EPW, the moment people get data set like this, they simply fit an exponential function, compute growth rate, and put 2 asterisks, 3 asterisks, and see whether it's significant at 3% level, 1% level, 5% level. If it's slightly sophisticated, they'll report p-values, etc. All these things they do it mechanically. They don't do it. So, you know, they just look at any number of papers, you know, whether it's a planning commission fire plan or economics. They fit exponential trend functions and growth rate. Are they justified? You have to see that, you know, if I plot it, there is no exponential growth at all. I don't even have to do that. Let me just take the annual growth rates. Look at the annual growth rates. Now, if the moment if it is in parentheses, it means minus. Okay. So agriculture in the 2002, 2001, in that first year of the new millennium, it declined by 4.84%. In the next year, it increased by 5.85%. Next year, 2002, 2003, again increased by 2.88%. 2003-4, it increased by 11%. Then in 2004-5, declined by 6.5%. In other words, this is how it has been going on. Okay. So as a good statistician, and from whatever I learned from my teachers or something, applying my common sense, what I did was, it doesn't make sense. So I took a geometric mean of all these 1 plus R's and computed growth rate. I found that the agricultural sector in Maharashtra was just stagnating. The compound annual growth rate was just 1.44%. Okay, it looks that, you know, in the year 2004, 2003-4, it has increased at 11%, but it has declined by 6% in next year. Again, it increased by 9%. It's a great economy, Maharashtra. Fluctuations fantastic. You can see that 4%, 5%, almost, you know. And in the year 2002-8-9, it is even declined by 21%. Great performance, you know, declined by 21%. This is Maharashtra. But the question is that, you know, okay. So looking at this profile, I plotted it also. And the first step I do anything is whenever I get data, I plotted this first row and try to see. Then I found it is nowhere near exponential. So I just computed the geometric mean of this 1 plus R's and found out that the agriculture sector in Maharashtra was virtually stagnant. It was going hardly at the rate of 1.4, which is virtually stagnant. You see, this is what I report in my report for the government of Maharashtra, Human Development Report. But, you know, there is a set of expert panel who are supposed to be advisor to even to me. So they said they all know these fitting regressions, standard errors, significant level, etc. Some econometrics they know. They told me, Dr. Suryanarayan, what you've done is wrong. You should not do this. You fit a regression. They told me to fit a regression and report a growth rate. Then he said you can see that whether it's significant or not. Compute a trend growth rate. I did that. I have to do it. So, for example, even though I teach econometrics, I have to just listen to the government of Maharashtra has appointed some experts who advise me. I have to just follow them. I followed them and did it. I told them, if I fit your trend function, agriculture's growth rate, there is a fantastic growth, 3.5 Hindu rate of growth. It's a great growth rate, I told them. They said, yes, that is what it is. No, you are unnecessarily showing the agricultural performance very poor, 1.44%. Actually, if you look at the fit function, it's 3.5%. They patted on their back and they looked at each other and had a cup of tea. This is what advisors advised me. But the sad story is, this is misleading. You can't, these trend functions, you can't do that. And you cannot make any inference based on trend functions. You cannot go, if you can see hundreds of articles in EPW, hundreds of books on Indian industrial growth rate, where I don't know, even the eminent people who have got awards and awards and awards and awards, and computing growth rates for different years, fitting trend functions and compare them, etc. Trend growth rates based on two trend functions can be compared only if these two trend functions provide 100% fit. Only if R squared is 100. Otherwise, you cannot compare trend growth rates at all. There is a serious specification error. This is the fundamental thing. I think you should remember, at least attending this class. You look at the entire literature on the Indian economy. Go to EPW right from its origin. I think there are several volumes, issues of the Indian Journal of Agricultural Economics also. People have written articles and articles and articles on growth rates based on trend functions. It's all nonsense. You can't compare growth rates based on two trend functions unless the trend functions provide 100% fit. Otherwise, this is just a joke. For example, I'm telling you this Maharashtra actual growth rate was, agriculture sector was stagnating with the growth rate of just 1.44%, but if it is trend function, it is 3.50%. You're not asking me this question, why? You should have immediately asked me. In fact, I made very, very critical, very controversial comments. Okay, but those are absolutely valid. But none of you asked me a question, why? Please, you should learn to ask your question. If for every statement your teacher asks, you should immediately ask why. Why are you making this comment? So I'm asking this question. Now you're not asking me a question. So I'm ending my presentation with a question. Can you tell me why I'm making this statement, saying that this statement, I cannot fit a trend function based on, for this agriculture GDP and say that 3.5%, and that estimate is wrong. I should use only 1.44% as the correct growth rate. I made one statement. I also made another statement saying that two trend functions cannot be compared unless they provide 100% fit. I made a very, very strong statement, which you will never come across in any economic literature, anywhere on earth. So I'm telling you very fundamental features that you have to keep in mind while using statistical tools. Okay, I think I will stop it here because my time is up. In fact, I have got several stories to tell you what sort of poverty estimates people do. Okay, and this is the last question I think I should draw your attention. This is very important. Why don't people, hundreds of papers have been written in EPW everywhere. This sixth fire plan is another great sixth fire plan, celebrated sixth fire plan of the Government of India, Planning Commission. What is this sixth fire plan? It is known for growth with redistribution strategy. What did they show? They said, look at this. They gave a base year, 1780. They even said that, rural poverty was 50.70% and urban poverty 4.31%. Look how precise they are. Even to the second decimal place, I would have rounded it off. I made it just 30. I have put in. They made it 31. So precise. And this was the base year for the sixth fire plan. And they made okay. They will reduce poverty by growth, redistribution. And this is the most celebrated table of the sixth fire plan. But the tragedy is, and people wrote articles and articles. If you look at EPW or any journal, you can see articles and articles. My fundamental question is, from where did the Planning Commission get these two numbers, 50.70 and even 40.31%? Because in the base year 1780, there was no NSS survey at all. How did the government got such precise figures? In other words, doing research means asking fundamental questions. How valid is the data source? How valid are these estimates? How valid is my approach based on certain assumptions or certain tools and techniques? How valid is my interpretation? These are the questions that you should use even before applying simple statistical tools. Okay, I think I'll stop it here. Yeah, and I welcome you. No, you can ask me any questions if you have. Otherwise, I'll stop it here. Yeah.
So thank you, sir. We are running short of time. Maybe one or two questions we can take. We have
Yeah.
11:15. So we can have like maybe one or two questions. If any participant wants to ask any questions.
Okay, I hope I'm clear. Okay, I have made very controversial comments. So possibly you'll take time to understand because all of them, at least some of you who are halfway through your PhD, or some of you who have finished your PhD or doing postdoctoral, must have estimated hundreds of trend functions and growth rates, etc. I'm telling you, these trend functions don't exist. They don't make sense. I'm making very controversial comments, but they are valid comments. So you'll take time to assimilate, but you are not asking me the question. You can always WhatsApp and ask me whatever questions you have. I know there's no time for me to continue further. You can always get in touch with me on my mobile. I am on WhatsApp also, and Dr. Rajesh will be having my mobile number. And anytime you can ask me questions, any statistical issue, not only whatever I talked on. But today I thought I should teach you some descriptive statistics and fundamentals, so that you don't commit these errors. Okay. I wish you all the best, and you have been very nice to me. You're not asking me any question. Professor Mandira was telling that you are asking her questions non-stop yesterday, so she was very impressed. But you have been very nice to me today. I don't know. This is not. I don't call it nice. You should ask questions. So I give you more liberty. So I'm giving you my WhatsApp number, which Dr. Rajesh will give you. Feel free to ask me questions anytime, and I wish you all the best. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Thank
Am
you,
I
sir.
supposed to leave, or you have anything to say? Bye. Can I leave?
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
So we will have a next session by 11:15. Be ready. Okay, see you.